Some encounters do not end when the conversation ends. The person leaves, the room becomes quiet, yet the dialogue continues inside your mind. You replay what was said, you revise what you should have answered, you feel the residue of irritation, tension, or quiet self-doubt. The interaction is over, but your nervous system behaves as if it is still happening. This is the hidden cost of toxic dynamics. Not the words themselves, but the psychological occupation that follows. A single comment can echo for hours. A subtle provocation can disturb an entire day. You are no longer reacting to the person. You are reacting to your interpretation of the memory. It feels as though they disturbed your peace. But pause. Did they truly carry your mind away with them, or did something within you remain entangled? Stoic philosophy draws a distinction most people overlook. Epictetus teaches in the Enchiridion that some things are within your control, while others are not. Among those outside your control stand other people's behavior, tone, and judgments. Yet between their action and your disturbance stands a decisive mediator: perception. This reflection is not about defeating difficult people, not about manipulation, and not about suppressing emotion. Stoicism never asked you to become cold. It asked you to become lucid, to see clearly where agitation is created, where reactions are triggered, and where authority is silently surrendered. Because toxic individuals rarely dominate through force. They dominate through reaction, through predictable emotional hooks, through the unconscious reflex to defend, argue, justify, or retaliate. What appears as external conflict is often internal vulnerability exposed. Something changes when this mechanism becomes visible. When you recognize that the disturbance lingering after the encounter is not sustained by them, but by the meaning your mind continues assigning to it. When you see how easily peace is traded for the temporary satisfaction of being right, understood, or vindicated. Freedom begins at this precise boundary. The boundary where you stop asking how to control them and begin examining how to govern your response to what was never yours to control. Toxicity as a reaction. Toxic behavior is often misunderstood as raw hostility, cruelty, or negativity, but its deeper mechanism is more strategic, more subtle. It operates as a reaction trap, a dynamic designed, consciously or not, to pull you into emotional engagement. Notice the pattern: a provocative remark, a dismissive tone, a subtle insult disguised as humor. The content may seem trivial, yet the emotional effect is immediate. You feel the impulse to correct, defend, explain, retaliate. The trap is not the statement. The trap is the reaction it seeks to trigger. Once engaged, the dynamic feeds itself. Your defense invites further provocation. Your irritation fuels their persistence. Your emotional shift becomes the center of the exchange. What could have remained a minor discomfort transforms into psychological turbulence. Marcus Aurelius observes in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 11, that the best response to another's wrongdoing is not imitation. Yet reaction traps depend precisely on imitation, on pulling you from deliberate reasoning into reflexive emotion. The danger lies in misinterpreting the objective. You believe you are responding to clarify, to resolve, to restore fairness. Meanwhile, the interaction quietly shifts into a cycle of stimulation and reaction. Attention narrows. Emotion intensifies. Perspective collapses. Your reaction becomes reinforcement, not because the other person necessarily planned it, but because reactive engagement stabilizes the pattern. The more emotionally invested you become, the more control you surrender over your internal state. Epictetus teaches in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, that if someone succeeds in provoking you, recognize that your mind collaborated. This is not accusation, it is illumination. Without emotional participation, many toxic exchanges lose momentum. Here lies the crucial insight. Your reaction is often their reward, not agreement, not resolution, but disturbance itself. The visible shift in your composure, the confirmation that your equilibrium has been altered. And once this is understood, a difficult question emerges. If reaction sustains the trap, what happens when reaction is no longer given automatically? The illusion of winning the argument. There is a peculiar satisfaction in winning an argument. The sense of having defended your position, corrected an unfair statement, proven your point. In the moment, it feels like strength, like restoration of order, like victory. Yet, observe what often follows. The mind remains unsettled. The body retains tension. The conversation continues internally long after it has ended. You revisit details, refine responses, replay the emotional charge. You may have won the exchange, yet peace remains absent. This is the illusion. Victory in conflict does not guarantee victory in stability. Being right does not ensure being at rest. The ego celebrates resolution, while the nervous system carries agitation forward. What felt like dominance becomes prolonged psychological occupation. Seneca reflects in Letters from a Stoic, letter 18, that anger, even when justified, is a costly indulgence. Not because the cause lacks merit, but because the emotional aftermath often exceeds the original offense. The disturbance outlives the dispute. Toxic dynamics exploit this vulnerability. They lure you into contests where the prize appears to be correctness, dignity, or self-defense. But the hidden cost is internal turbulence, attention consumed, mood destabilized, energy drained. Marcus Aurelius writes in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 7, that the true measure of strength is not triumph over another, but mastery over one's own reactions. An argument won at the expense of composure is a transaction rarely examined honestly. Consider the paradox. You defend your peace by entering a battle that destroys it. You seek resolution through escalation. You pursue validation through disturbance. The mind confuses emotional intensity with effectiveness. Here emerges a sharper Stoic perspective. Victory without peace is defeat in disguise. And once this becomes clear, another layer of understanding opens. If conflict, even when won, leaves the mind agitated, what unseen mechanism allows another person's chaos to invade your internal state so easily? Emotional contagion. Not all disturbance arises from what is said. Much of it spreads through something less visible, yet deeply influential. Emotional contagion. The silent transmission of tension, irritation, anxiety, or hostility from one nervous system to another. You enter an interaction composed, stable, neutral. Minutes later, your internal state has shifted. Your patience thins. Your thoughts accelerate. Your body tightens. Nothing dramatic may have occurred, yet something has been absorbed. This is not weakness. It is human wiring. The nervous system constantly reads social signals. Tone, posture, micro-expressions, rhythm of speech. Without conscious awareness, your body mirrors the emotional climate around you. Exposure to agitation often generates agitation. Exposure to hostility awakens defensiveness. Toxic individuals frequently operate within this mechanism. Their instability becomes atmospheric, their tension contagious. Their emotional volatility invites unconscious synchronization. You begin to feel what they are projecting. Marcus Aurelius reflects in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 5, that the mind takes the shape of its dominant impressions. When repeatedly exposed to emotional turbulence, the untrained mind adopts disturbance as its temporary baseline. Observe the subtle progression. First, discomfort, then irritation, then emotional identification. You no longer witness their agitation. You inhabit it. Their chaos becomes your internal experience. Epictetus teaches in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 2, that events do not disturb us, but our judgments about them. Emotional contagion intensifies when perception loses distance. When you treat another's mood as a personal threat rather than an observed condition. The Stoic response is neither suppression nor escape, it is regulation, the deliberate maintenance of internal posture amid external turbulence, the refusal to let another's emotional state dictate your own. Because once you see how easily moods propagate, a new responsibility emerges, not controlling others' emotions, but guarding the boundaries of your own. Most toxic people are not powerful. Most toxic people do not possess extraordinary power. They do not dominate through superior intelligence, authority, or control. Their influence emerges from something far simpler and far more common: predictable reactions. Consider how easily a careless remark can alter your emotional state, how quickly a dismissive tone can provoke defensiveness, how effortlessly irritation can be triggered. The leverage lies not in their strength, but in the reliability of your response. What appears as their power is often your reflex. Marcus Aurelius writes in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 8, that you have power over your mind, not outside events. Yet when reactions become automatic, this authority is temporarily abandoned. The stimulus dictates the response. The provocation governs the emotional shift. Toxic behavior frequently depends on this mechanism. A pattern of baiting, testing, provoking, repeating. Not because disturbance is guaranteed, but because it is likely. Human psychology, when unexamined, becomes predictable terrain. Epictetus teaches in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, that if someone succeeds in provoking you, recognize where the true vulnerability resides. Not in their words, but in the judgment that transforms words into injury. Here the illusion collapses. They seem powerful because they can disturb you. But disturbance is not evidence of their dominance. It is evidence of an internal process still governed by interpretation rather than examination. The moment reactions become less predictable, their leverage weakens. The moment provocation fails to produce agitation, the dynamic destabilizes. What once felt like their control begins to reveal itself as conditional upon your participation. And from this realization emerges a decisive Stoic shift. If their influence depends on the role you unconsciously accept, what happens when you refuse to play it? The Stoic break, refusing the role assigned to you. Every toxic dynamic carries an unspoken script, a role silently offered, sometimes imposed. The defensive one, the offended one, the explainer, the aggressor, the one who must react, justify, correct, or emotionally engage. Most people accept these roles without noticing. A provocation appears, and the response unfolds automatically. The tone shifts, the posture tightens, the mind prepares its defense. What feels like spontaneous reaction is often compliance with a psychological position designed by the interaction itself. Stoic awareness interrupts this pattern. Epictetus teaches in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 2, that if someone provokes you, remember that it is your judgment about the event that disturbs you. Between stimulus and reaction exists a space rarely examined. In that space lies freedom. Refusing the assigned role does not mean passivity. It means non-participation in emotional choreography that erodes your stability. You do not mirror hostility. You do not rush to defend identity. You do not allow another's behavior to dictate your internal posture. Marcus Aurelius reflects in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 11, that the best way to avenge yourself against wrongdoing is not to resemble the wrongdoer. Reaction traps depend precisely on resemblance, on pulling you into predictable emotional alignment. When you step outside the script, something unexpected happens. The dynamic falters. Provocation loses momentum. The exchange no longer follows its anticipated trajectory, not because the other person changes, but because the structure sustaining the tension is disrupted. You disarm the interaction when you stop playing the character it demands. Instead of reacting, you observe. Instead of defending, you evaluate. Instead of escalating, you remain grounded. And once this break becomes possible, a new question arises naturally. If you no longer fuel the dynamic through reaction, how do you maintain strength without confrontation? Neutralizing without confrontation. Strength is often confused with visible resistance. Raising your voice, correcting sharply, matching intensity with intensity. Yet many conflicts are not neutralized through force, but through composure that refuses escalation. Toxic interactions thrive on friction. They anticipate defensiveness, irritation, argument. When these reactions appear, the pattern stabilizes. But when they fail to emerge, the psychological momentum weakens. Composure becomes disruption. Marcus Aurelius writes in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 6, that the mind retains its tranquility when it does not surrender to impulse. This is not withdrawal. It is disciplined presence. a refusal to let emotional provocation dictate behavioral response. Neutralizing without confrontation does not mean silence at any cost. It means measured response, non-defensive tone, emotional non-cooperation. You neither attack nor submit. You remain internally anchored while responding with clarity rather than agitation. Notice the difference. A reactive reply carries tension. A composed reply carries authority. One feeds the dynamic, the other subtly destabilizes it. Epictetus teaches in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, that if someone speaks ill of you, consider whether their statement touches something within your control. If it does, correct yourself. If it does not, why be disturbed? The power lies not in counterattack, but in interpretive discipline. Calm boundary setting replaces emotional retaliation. Clear speech replaces defensive explanation. Steadiness replaces the impulse to prove, dominate, or emotionally discharge. The objective is not to overpower the other person. It is to preserve sovereignty over your internal state, to remain unhooked while engaged, to respond without inheriting the emotional turbulence offered to you. And as this capacity develops, another Stoic distinction becomes essential. You do not always need distance from people. Sometimes you need distance from their psychological influence. Internal distance versus social distance. The common advice is immediate and absolute. Remove toxic people. Cut them off, walk away. While sometimes necessary, this solution is not always realistic. Workplaces, families, obligations, and shared environments often make physical separation impossible. Stoic philosophy offers a more nuanced distinction. Social distance concerns proximity. Internal distance concerns perception. You may remain in the same room, engage in the same conversation, fulfill the same responsibilities, yet experience a radically different internal state. Not because circumstances changed, but because psychological entanglement loosened. Marcus Aurelius reflects in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 7, that you can preserve serenity even amid noise, conflict, and difficulty, provided your mind does not surrender its governing role. The disturbance is rarely created by presence itself, but by identification with what unfolds. Internal distance is not indifference, it is clarity of boundaries. You witness behavior without absorbing it. You hear criticism without personalizing it. You observe emotional volatility without synchronizing with it. Engagement becomes deliberate rather than reactive. Epictetus teaches in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 3, that it is not events, but opinions about events that disturb us. Internal distance restores this separation. Their tone remains theirs. Their agitation remains theirs. Their judgments remain expressions of their perspective, not definitions of your equilibrium. Without this distinction, every interaction feels invasive. With it, composure becomes portable. Stability becomes independent of environment. You are no longer psychologically carried away by atmospheres you cannot control. You stay present, yet not possessed. Involved, yet not entangled. Aware, yet not destabilized. And once this separation becomes real, the title's promise demands precise clarification. What does it truly mean to disarm someone? What disarming actually means? Disarming is often misunderstood. It is confused with defeating, silencing, humiliating, or overpowering. But Stoic disarming operates on a different level. It concerns leverage, not domination. To disarm a toxic dynamic is to remove its capacity to destabilize you. The individual may remain unchanged. Their tone, behavior, provocations may persist. Yet the psychological effect weakens because the mechanism sustaining their influence no longer functions as before. Marcus Aurelius writes in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 8, that you may choose not to be harmed. And when you do not feel harmed, you have not been harmed. This is not denial of difficulty. It is recognition that disturbance depends upon interpretation. Toxic behavior derives much of its force from emotional reaction. Irritation, defensiveness, visible agitation. When these responses diminish, the interaction loses friction. Without friction, escalation struggles to sustain itself. Disarming, then, is the withdrawal of emotional fuel. You are no longer easily provoked, no longer mentally occupied afterward, no longer compelled to defend identity reflexively. The encounter may still be unpleasant, but it ceases to be consuming. Epictetus teaches in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, that if someone insults you, remember that it is your judgment that gives the insult its power. When judgment becomes more deliberate, provocation loses its automatic authority. Observable shifts emerge naturally. Reduced emotional drain, shorter mental replay, greater composure under tension, clearer thinking amid provocation, stability that does not depend on controlling others' behavior. Disarming is not an act performed on another person. It is a state achieved within yourself. And when this becomes clear, the deeper Stoic integration completes the picture. Seen clearly, the dynamic was never sustained by the other person alone. It was sustained by a sequence unfolding within you. Provocation encountered, interpretation formed, reaction triggered, disturbance reinforced. A cycle so rapid it appeared automatic, inevitable, justified. Stoic practice slows this sequence. Epictetus teaches in the Enchiridion that events do not disturb us, but our judgments about them. Between what happens and how you feel stands perception, the silent architect of emotional experience. When perception is unconscious, reactions govern. When perception becomes examined, authority returns. Toxic individuals may continue their patterns. Their provocations, criticisms, tensions may remain unchanged, yet your internal landscape begins to reorganize. Reaction loses immediacy. Interpretation gains scrutiny. Emotional impulses are observed rather than obeyed. Marcus Aurelius reflects in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 6, that if you are distressed by anything external, the cause lies in your estimate of it. And this estimate remains within your power to revise. Not because you control reality, but because you govern meaning. Provocation without automatic reaction weakens conflict. Observation without emotional identification weakens contagion. Acceptance without internal resistance weakens agitation. What once felt like psychological invasion reveals itself as interpretive participation. They cannot control your mind without your interpretation. Peace emerges through disciplined perception, emotional regulation, and cognitive sovereignty. Not as suppression, not as avoidance, but as clarity applied consistently in moments where reaction once dominated. The world remains unpredictable. People remain imperfect. Friction remains possible. Yet stability becomes less conditional because its source has shifted inward. And from this integration arises the closing realization. You do not become unshaken because the world becomes gentle. You become unshaken because your mind stops surrendering itself to every provocation it encounters. The presence of difficult people is not the decisive factor. The governance of perception is. Stoic wisdom never promised a life free from friction. Marcus Aurelius writes in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 2, that you will meet interference, ingratitude, arrogance, and selfishness. Not as an exception, but as part of the human condition. The question is never whether such encounters occur. The question is how your mind receives them. When reactions cease to be automatic, composure strengthens. When interpretation becomes deliberate, disturbance loses momentum. You remain capable of response, yet less vulnerable to emotional hijacking. Stability is no longer negotiated with external behavior. You do not become passive, you become unhookable. Provocation may still arise, but it no longer dictates your internal climate. Criticism may still appear, but it no longer defines your worth. Toxic dynamics may persist, yet their psychological leverage weakens when your participation becomes conscious rather than reflexive. Epictetus teaches in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 4, that no person is free who is not master of themselves. This mastery is quiet, rarely visible, yet unmistakable in its effects. Reduced agitation, clearer thought, emotional steadiness where turbulence once dominated. Nothing dramatic may change outwardly, yet inwardly something essential stabilizes. The space between stimulus and response widens. The mind regains its governing role. Peace becomes less fragile because it is no longer dependent on controlling what cannot be controlled. Strength grows quieter, clarity grows sharper, peace grows durable. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, please like, share and subscribe for more Stoic insights and watch the latest videos.